You know, if you're like me, then you hate loose ends, and there's something about this bin right here that you see on the right side of the screen that really drives me bananas, because it is kind of a loose end that I never really tied up neatly. And just to give a little bit of background, this tracks back to early middle June, and June 10th is the actual date, which was 54 days ago at this point. And if you remember, I was in the middle of trying to rescue the last of my bins, which was kind of in the process of sort of crashing and burning, which is something that I had happen in a number of my bins recently. And in this case, it was European night crawlers, and what I had done was, a few days prior to what's being shown here, I had created some material to give the worms a chance to move out on their own. I found that that really wasn't happening fast enough, and that the material that the worms were inhabiting was just getting worse and worse by the day. So I decided that I'm going to intervene. I'm going to pick out all the worms one by one and take all the material that appeared to be free of worms and drop it into this container here. And the way I captured all that in my tracking spreadsheet, just to recap briefly, is to show that right here, like I said, June 10th. Basically, I captured that as the material being, let me open that up a little bit better, that the material was basically emptied out into the garden. And that's a little bit of a white lie, because it's not so true. What really happened with that was that that clear plastic container that the material was in was taken outside, and it's been sitting out there. At this point, it's been sitting out there for 54 days, and it's just a kind of a thorn in my side to look over there and think to myself, you know, the material's just sitting there. It's a bunch of stuff that was, you know, almost entirely castings. I had this funny feeling that there might have still been some cocoons or maybe even baby worms somewhere within that material. And, you know, number one, if there are still worms living in that, I feel really bad just leaving it and letting them die in there, letting the material dry out completely. And number two, I've got a container sitting outside in the yard that I could really use down in my wormery. So I think I'd like to tie this little loose end up today. So I'm going to go out there, and we're going to check back in on that clear plastic container into which I had emptied all that material that I had rescued the worms from. And I've already made the decision that I'm going to just take the entire contents and I'm going to drop it into my outdoor compost barrel. And if there's a few European night crawlers that get introduced into that population, it's kind of cool. Who knows? Maybe they'll bump into each other over time and mate. Seems very unlikely, but who knows? At least they'll have a place to live and grow and eat and not die. And that's the main thing. And then I can rinse out that container, bring it back down into my wormery, and get some use out of it. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background into what I'm doing here. So I'm going to put on a glove, and we're going to head outside and check in on that bin, see if there's any worms in it at all. There could be no worms, who knows. And then I'm going to dump it, rinse it, and that's all I'm after today. So let's get to work. Oh, here it is. Last time we saw this 54 days ago, it was crawling with mites. It was also still quite damp, very damp. And it's very dry, so I have not been in here whatsoever. I've not even touched this stuff. So this is the first time I'm touching it in, what, seven and a half weeks, 54 days, right? Perhaps there's not going to be much to see here. Although I do kind of have this feeling that under this hard, dry material, there might still be some dampness going on. And I sure hope so, for the sake of any potential survivors. And it sure doesn't seem like we've got very much hope here, but let's just see what we've got. At least, at least down here the material still moves, and right away, as soon as I crack the material open, we've got ourselves one poor little worm here. Gosh, I feel so bad for this little guy. He must be struggling, because this material is just so close to being completely dried out. And not only that, but it's also just so dense. It's what have we here? Is that also another worm? I keep seeing these little weird things, and you know, this stuff has just been sitting out here, so it is quite possible that other creatures have actually maybe moved in here and started trying to take advantage of this material here. Because there's probably a good amount of food scraps. If anyone recognizes what that was that I just held in my hand before, I believe I can see another one right here. I'm questioning if perhaps they are the larvae of flies? I don't know. I'm definitely not a bug expert. So, man, I feel so bad for this little guy. Probably doesn't appreciate the fact that I just pulled him out of that damp material that he was kind of held out in. But I am glad to see that we found a survivor, and so quickly, because that leads me to believe that maybe we've got more. I guess what I was probing around for was that I thought I had seen a cocoon, and it was pretty dark in color, and it kind of made me wonder if, you know, maybe there was still even more potential in this container for more survivors to actually be hatched out of their cocoons and to emerge as baby worms. And, you know, I wonder if this little guy right here could be a clue. Perhaps those larvae that we're observing are whatever kind of fly that is, some sort of a fly. Oh, how do you like that? Right there on the tip of my finger is a cocoon. Pretty dark in color, quite possibly on the verge of hatching a baby worm. So I don't want to prolong this. I'm definitely curious to see what's in this stuff, and if I could kind of break this stuff up a little bit. See here too, another one of these possibly a insect larvae, probably an insect larvae of some sort, as well as another cocoon, another fairly dark colored cocoon. I just keep hoping that we're going to bump into maybe a couple more worms, and if we don't, that's not the end of the world either, but it was kind of surprising right off the bat to bump into one right in the beginning, and a pretty good sized one at that. Makes me wonder if the little guy was born here. I don't know if it's mature yet or not. It looks pretty young. A baby worm would not yet have that clitellum formation on its body, that little bulge. And I don't think I see it on this little guy. So it could just be a baby worm that's still trying to get to that point where it's old enough to breed. And in a container like this, it's not going to find many partners to breed with. And I mean, for that matter, the compost barrel that I was planning to place all this material into is mostly, I believe, red wigglers. I mean, I know that when I originally started my outdoor overwinter project a couple years ago, I had placed, here we go, maybe another survivor, and another one. That's good. Glad I'm doing this, because otherwise these little guys would have been doomed. So yeah, I had used European night crawlers as well as red wigglers when I had done my overwinter project. But, you know, the container that I use for composting is populated by worms, but I would somehow doubt that it's European night crawlers in that container. But then again, the castings that I use in my garden is a mix of different types of worms, including Euros. And I have to guess that it's, you know, worms that have emerged from the cocoons that went out in my castings that I've used in my garden over the years, that make up the worms that eventually made their way into my compost barrel where we're going to be placing this stuff. So there is a possibility, I suppose, that maybe there are some Euros in there. So I don't know if you're keeping count. I believe that was 3 now. I don't even know if one of them might have already squirmed away, not really enjoying this bright light that we've got going on over here. But we've almost checked through the majority of the material here, and I get the sense that, you know, I'm not the only way for these little guys to get out. I'm sensing that they probably have the means to travel through the material that they're inhabiting. I would find it hard to believe that they've just been trapped and locked in the material that they're in, and have been so for all that time. So More cocoons. I see a couple of them right here. A little tiny baby worm here on my finger. So, you know, even if we just saved half a dozen worms, it might not seem significant, but I feel like we've done kind of our good deed for the day. Rescuing these little guys out of this bin, which would have probably, in a short period of time at this point, lost all of its moisture content and left these little guys stranded and doomed. So I'm glad that we're doing this just in the nick of time, it seems. And once we put all this stuff into my compost barrel, I am going to put it down kind of low, and it'll all be buried, and it'll be in a place where all this material can probably get rehydrated, and then it'll eventually sort of just blend in with all the other compost in my compost barrel. And hopefully the cocoons that are in here will also still be potentially hatching in the near future, allowing for even more baby worms to occupy that space. So, alright, I think that's it. I didn't really want to go too overboard with this. I already feel like I may have, but I was just really intrigued by the fact that we were actually finding worms. And I also just felt like I wanted to try to break up any of these larger chunks just to make sure that if worms are potentially trapped within it, that I'm helping to free them. I just wish I could maybe somehow hydrate this material to loosen it all up, but you know, I think once it's in the compost barrel, underneath a whole bunch of pruned tomato leaves that I put in there recently, with the couple sheets of cardboard covering it up, it'll be kind of in a humid space where there's a lot of humidity, moisture recirculating, and hopefully this stuff will loosen up in time and it'll just blend in with the rest of the compost in there. So let's head over there now and dump this little container of material and give these poor little guys their freedom. So here's the compost barrel. It was checked in on yesterday because we came into here to recruit worms for another project. This is always interesting when I pop open this container. If you're familiar with black soldier flies start out as little tiny larvae, and then they grow into this pretty good sized larva. And when they reach this kind of dark color, they try to crawl out of the food source that they're inhabiting, so that they could just sort of rest, be away from where the action is, and then pupate. So they'll just sort of turn into a fly within this, what used to be their skin. It'll sort of turn into a little cocoon, and they'll emerge as a black soldier fly. So hopefully I'm not disrupting that process for these guys too much. But over here near the surface, I always bump into lots of these. I guess all these leaves on top are kind of a good place for them to be able to crawl up into and get away from where all the real active feeding is happening, so that they can transform into a fly. So let's just create a little bit of a hole. You can see a lot of moisture down here. You can see a lot of other much younger black soldier fly larvae creeping around in here, working down the material. Busy little bees, busy little bugs, whatever you want to call them. So unfortunately I got to do this with one hand here because I don't have any place to place the tripod that the camera is mounted to. So let's just proceed and get this done. Let's release this material into this nice humid spot where hopefully it'll rehydrate, giving all the inhabitants of this material, not that there's many, but the few inhabitants that have survived and inhabit this material, give them a chance to, you know, live, be in a nice comfortable place, as opposed to being in a dreadful dry place where they're gonna certainly meet their doom. And do their part in the composting process here within my composting barrel. Alright, well, that's pretty much it. I didn't really want to do much more than that today, as my objective was just to kind of tie up that loose end, get that container emptied, and get those poor worms out of there, and get this container rinsed out and back into service down in my wormery. Alright everyone, that's it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day.